My name is Hannah Reyes, 31 years old, living in Portland, Oregon, and just 1 week before Thanksgiving, my mother called to say the words I'll never forget. "You're banned from Thanksgiving this year, idiot." Behind her, I could hear my sister Brittany laughing, as if my exclusion was part of the holiday fun. For a moment, I just stood there, phone in hand, heart quiet. Then I said quietly, "Okay, Mom, have a nice holiday." And I meant it. Because that night, instead of crying, I packed my car and drove toward the mountains to an old cabin my grandfather left me, and decided to host a Thanksgiving of my own. Not for people who mocked me, but for those who needed warmth the most. A group of orphans who'd never had a family dinner before. The laughter, the light, the joy, it was everything my old life wasn't. Tell me, if you were in my place, would you have done the same? And where are you watching this from? What time is it right now? That night, I barely slept. The rain had softened into a mist by dawn, but my mind kept replaying my mother's voice, every word slicing open something I thought had already healed. "You're banned from Thanksgiving." It wasn't the cruelty of the sentence that hurt most, it was how familiar it sounded, as if she'd been waiting years to finally say it out loud. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, tracing the cracks of old memories that began to surface like bruises under my skin. I grew up in Boise, Idaho, in a modest 2-story house with a maple tree out front and a swing that never really swung right. My sister Brittany was the golden child, pretty, animated, and impossible to ignore. People used to call her Sunshine. She had that kind of laughter that made adults smile and made me feel invisible. My parents adored her. Every drawing she made was hung on the refrigerator. Every joke she told was met with applause. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one. The girl who read under the table during family dinners, who asked too many why questions, who never seemed to smile at the right time. "Hannah always kills the mood," my mother would sigh, as if my existence alone could dim the lights. I remember one Thanksgiving when I was 14. I'd spent all afternoon baking my first apple pie. I followed the recipe to the letter, brushed the crust with butter like the magazine had said, and waited for the smell of cinnamon to fill the kitchen. When it came out of the oven, golden and slightly uneven, I felt a rare flicker of pride. I carried it carefully to the table, where Mom was setting out the silverware. She took one look and wrinkled her nose. "It looks dry," she said. And a little sad. Minutes later, Brittany came running in, carrying a tray of burned dinner rolls, black on the edges, smoke curling into the air. She laughed, waving her hand to fan away the smell. Dad grinned and clapped. "At least she tried," he said warmly. "Good effort, kiddo." Everyone chuckled. I remember standing there, the pie still in my hands, the heat seeping through the dish and burning my palms, but I couldn't feel anything except that hollow space in my chest. That night, while they laughed in the living room, I stood at the sink washing dishes that weren't mine. The window above the faucet fogged up from the steam, and through it I could see the faint glow of the Christmas lights Dad had strung outside early that year. My reflection in the glass looked blurry, almost like someone else's face. I remember whispering to myself, "Next year will be different." But it never was. The pattern stayed the same. Brittany failed a class. She's just under pressure. I got a B+, what happened to the A? Brittany forgot to feed the dog. She's busy. I did the chores, you're supposed to. Every act of effort from me was invisible, every mistake unforgettable. Somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to make them proud and started focusing on survival, getting through dinners without being the punchline, holidays without the ache of comparison. Now, years later, sitting in my Portland apartment, those memories felt like ghosts pacing the floor. I looked around at the neat, quiet space I'd built, books aligned, the faint scent of coffee, the hum of the city below, and realized it was the same stillness I'd once hated as a child. But this time, it was mine. No one could invade it or tell me who to be inside it. I stood by the window again. Outside, a neighbor was carrying grocery bags through the drizzle, probably planning a big family dinner. I felt a sting of envy before it dissolved into something calmer, clearer. Maybe loneliness wasn't the enemy I'd thought it was. Maybe it was the silence before something new begins. I remembered my father's old line, "Hannah, you should learn to smile like your sister." I touched the cold glass and let out a small, private laugh, one that didn't need anyone's approval. The apartment was quiet except for the soft hum of the heater and the rhythmic beat of rain against the metal railing. I poured myself another cup of coffee and sat at my desk, the light from the lamp casting a warm circle on the papers. The same silence that used to feel like punishment now felt like a choice. I didn't have to fill it. I didn't have to chase warmth from people who thrived on withholding it. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like the girl washing dishes in the dark. I felt like someone standing on the edge of something freer, someone ready to stop waiting for permission to be enough. The next morning, I woke before my alarm, the sky still bruised gray and blue over Portland. My apartment was cold, the kind of cold that seeps through the walls even with the heater humming. I made coffee, but the taste was dull. Maybe it wasn't the coffee that had gone bitter, maybe it was me. My mother's words still echoed faintly, looping through my mind like static. "You're banned from Thanksgiving, idiot." The insult itself didn't matter anymore. It was the years of small betrayals behind it that had finally begun to add up. I opened my laptop, intending to distract myself with work, but a thought struck me out of nowhere, something so simple, so quiet, it almost startled me. For years, I'd been paying their bills, electricity, water, internet, even their streaming subscriptions. It had started right after college, when my mother had called crying about a missed payment notice. "You're the responsible one," she'd said. "You know we'd do the same for you." And I had believed her. Every month since, the payments had gone out automatically. My name was buried in their comfort, invisible but essential, like the pipes under their floor or the power running through their walls. Now, staring at the list of auto payments, something inside me hardened. The cursor blinked, waiting. My fingers hovered above the keyboard for a long time before I finally exhaled and began to move. One by one, I opened each bill. Electricity, water, gas, internet. All of them linked to my account. All of them reminders of a version of me who still thought she could earn love through responsibility. My mouse hovered over the first cancel auto pay button. I could hear the echo of my mother's voice. "Good daughters help their family." My own voice answered it, steady and low. "Good daughters deserve peace too." I clicked. The confirmation screen popped up immediately. "Are you sure you want to cancel automatic payments for this account?" I hesitated only for a heartbeat before replying, "Yes." Then the system asked me to confirm my name. I typed it slowly, Hannah Reyes, and pressed confirm. There was no sound, no fanfare. Just a small, gray checkmark that appeared on the screen. Yet the silence that followed felt monumental. For years, I'd carried the invisible weight of keeping the lights on in a home that had long gone dark for me. And now, with a single click, that burden lifted. It was as if an invisible chain around my chest had finally snapped. When I closed the laptop, the room felt different, lighter, emptier, freer. I stood by the window, watching the drizzle turn to snow, soft flakes landing on the ledge like confetti for a celebration no one else could see. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty for putting myself first. That evening, while cleaning my closet, I found a small wooden box tucked behind old sweaters I hadn't worn in years. Inside was a faded envelope, edges yellowed, my name written in a trembling but familiar hand. Grandpa Richard. My heart caught for a second. I hadn't thought of him in so long. He'd raised me for a few years after my parents' marriage nearly fell apart. Those were the only years I'd ever felt truly safe. I sat on the floor and carefully unfolded the letter. The paper smelled faintly of cedar, the way his cabin always had. His handwriting was shaky but deliberate. "My dear Hannah, if the world ever becomes too cold, go back to the cabin in Bend. It's where peace lives. It's yours as much as it was ever mine. Don't let anyone tell you that you need permission to be happy. Love, Grandpa Richard. Tears welled up before I even realized it. I pressed the letter to my chest, breathing in the words. I could almost hear his voice again, slow, warm, patient, the way he'd talk while whittling wood by the fire. After a long while, I opened my laptop again and searched for Bend, Oregon. The satellite map showed a stretch of pine forest wrapped around a frozen lake. I zoomed in until the little marker landed on a clearing marked private road. My heart tightened, not with fear, but recognition. It felt like the map was pointing me home. Outside, the city lights flickered in the falling snow. I stared out at them, then at the small duffel bag in the corner of my room. For years, I'd been waiting for an invitation to belong, waiting for my mother's approval, my father's praise, my sister's acceptance. But none of that had ever come. Maybe it was time to stop waiting. I folded the letter and slipped it into my coat pocket. As I zipped the bag and set it by the door, a calm resolve settled over me, quiet and absolute. This year, I wasn't going to beg for a place at their table. I was going to build my own. I turned off the lights, letting the room fall into the soft glow of the street lamp outside. Snow was beginning to stick to the rooftops, and somewhere in the distance, a church bell chimed the hour. I smiled to myself, not the forced, polite smile I'd perfected for years, but a real one, small, honest, free. Not this year, I whispered into the quiet. This Thanksgiving, I'll make my own peace. The next morning, the world outside my window was dusted in white. Snow had finally replaced the endless Portland rain, blanketing the city in a quiet kind of stillness. I packed slowly, deliberately folding sweaters, slipping Grandpa's letter into my jacket pocket, unplugging my laptop, as if every motion carried a sense of finality. The apartment looked smaller once everything was packed, like it was already letting me go. I loaded my bags into the back seat of my Subaru, double-checked the route to Bend, and started the engine. The heater groaned to life, and so did something inside me that had been frozen for years. The road out of Portland curved along the Columbia River, the water gleaming like dark glass beneath a low silver sky. Every few miles, I passed bright orange signs that read, "Happy Thanksgiving." Some hanging from storefronts, others blinking from gas stations. Families would be filling shopping carts, prepping tables, roasting turkeys. The thought made me tighten my grip on the steering wheel. For so long, Thanksgiving had been a day that meant waiting. Waiting for an invitation that might come late, waiting for a seat at a table where my presence always felt like an obligation. I used to think being included was the same as being loved. Now I knew better. Mỗi năm tôi đợi được chấp nhận, I murmured softly to myself in Vietnamese, the language my grandpa had once taught me pieces of. Then, in English, I finished the thought aloud. This year, I choose to accept myself. The words echoed faintly inside the car. For the first time, they didn't feel like a defense, they felt like truth. As the miles stretched out, Oregon unfolded in shades of pine and frost. The air grew thinner, crisper. I rolled down the window just enough to feel it sting my skin. The mountains loomed ahead, solemn and blue. Freedom didn't look like fireworks or music. It looked like a road that didn't demand you turn back. About halfway to Bend, I stopped in a small town called Sisters, a place so quiet you could hear the wind brushing through the bare branches. The gas station was old, with a faded sign and a single pump that clicked slowly. As I filled the tank, I noticed a flyer taped to the glass door of the convenience store. It was handwritten, edges curling from the cold. Volunteers needed for Thanksgiving meal at Maple Grove Orphanage. Call Mrs. Evans. Something about it made me stop. The paper was simple, a little uneven, but the words glowed in my mind. Maybe it was the thought of a room full of kids who didn't have a family waiting for them either, or maybe it was the universe's quiet way of telling me where to go. I took a picture of the flyer and dialed the number before I could overthink it. "Hello, this is Hannah," I said when an elderly voice answered. "I saw your sign about volunteers for Thanksgiving." There was a pause on the other end, then a surprised laugh. "Oh, sweetheart," the woman said, her tone warm and bright. "This is Mrs. Evans. We'd love your help. We're always short on hands around the holidays. Do you have experience in the kitchen?" I smiled, glancing at the faint scar on my wrist from that first apple pie long ago. "I've had a few lessons," I said. Mrs. Evans chuckled. "That's more than most of us. We're in Maple Grove, just off Highway 97 before you reach Bend. The kids will be thrilled." When the call ended, I stood for a moment beside the car, phone still in my hand, snowflakes drifting onto the screen. Something warm spread through me, a feeling that wasn't quite joy, not yet, but close. It was purpose. I drove the last stretch with a new kind of calm. The trees grew taller, denser, their branches heavy with snow. My GPS voice eventually told me to turn onto a narrow road, and for a while there was nothing but forest and sky. I could feel the pull of the cabin somewhere ahead, like a memory waiting to be reclaimed. By late afternoon, the clouds began to thin. Golden light filtered through the trees, spilling across the dashboard. I stopped the car on a ridge overlooking a frozen lake, the kind that looked like it could shatter at a whisper. The air was so cold it bit through my gloves, but I didn't care. I stepped out, breathing in the clean silence. There was no traffic, no noise, no expectations, just the wind, the trees, and me. In the distance, a wooden sign peeked through the snow. "Bend, 12 miles." I got back in the car and smiled to myself, a small curve of the lips that felt unfamiliar but right. For the first time in my life, I wasn't running from home, I was driving toward peace. As the sun dipped behind the mountains, the sky burned in shades of pink and amber. The road narrowed again, winding deeper into the woods, and somewhere between the turns, I realized something quietly beautiful. I wasn't escaping them anymore. I was returning to myself. By the time I reached the turnoff to the old logging road, dusk had settled over the forest. The snow was falling harder now, soft and soundless, covering the pines in thick white layers that glowed faintly under the last light of the day. My tires crunched against the frozen gravel, the headlights sweeping across the trees like small beams of memory. Then, as the road curved one final time, I saw it, Grandpa Richard's cabin. It was smaller than I remembered, tucked between towering firs like a secret the forest had kept safe for me. The roof was heavy with snow, the porch sagging a little under the weight of years, but the sight of it sent a strange warmth through me. I parked the car and stepped out, my boots sinking into the powder. The air smelled sharp and clean, pine, smoke, winter. For a moment, I just stood there, breathing it in, my breath curling in the cold. The front door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood and cinnamon, faint but unmistakable. My throat tightened. Grandpa always used to simmer cinnamon sticks in apple cider on the stove, saying a home should smell like kindness. Even after all these years, the cabin still did. I flicked on the light switch out of habit, but of course, nothing happened. The power had long been cut off. I found the lanterns he used to keep by the door, dusted one off, and lit it with a match from the small metal tin beside it. The soft orange glow filled the room, and for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't feel empty, it felt sacred. Everything was exactly as he'd left it. The stone fireplace, the stack of books on the table, the old rocking chair by the window with a knitted blanket still draped over the back. My hands trembled slightly as I touched the surface of the table. That was when I noticed a single envelope resting in the center, covered in a thin layer of dust. The handwriting on it was careful, deliberate, though faded with time. "To Hannah when you come home." My heart stilled. I sat down, my fingers unsteady as I opened it. Inside was a folded letter and another document, yellowed at the edges. The letter came first, written in the familiar slanted scrawl that once guided my childhood. "My dear Hannah, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way back. I always knew you would. Life has a way of making us forget where peace lives, but it never disappears, it waits. The land this cabin rests on, all 50 acres of it, is now yours. The papers are enclosed. Don't ever let anyone make you feel you have to ask for permission to be happy. Love, Grandpa. My eyes blurred as I unfolded the second paper, a property deed, official and crisp despite its age. My name, written in bold print, stared back at me. Hannah Reyes, owner. I didn't even realize I was crying until a tear hit the paper. For years, my parents had made me feel small, like I owed them everything just for existing. And yet here was proof that someone, once, had seen me as worthy of owning something just because I was me. I leaned back in the chair, holding the letter to my chest. The walls of the cabin seemed to breathe around me. For the first time since I'd left Portland, the ache inside me softened into something gentle, like a heartbeat finally finding its rhythm again. As night settled in, I gathered kindling from the woodpile and built a fire in the hearth. The flames took quickly, crackling to life, their light painting gold across the wooden walls. I found an old skillet, the same one Grandpa used to fry apples in butter and brown sugar, and decided to make something simple. An apple pie, the dessert that had once marked the line between shame and pride in my life. I peeled the apples slowly, remembering the Thanksgiving when my mother had dismissed my effort with a single cruel word. Dry, she'd said. Sad. But this time, there was no one to judge the crust or compare it to anyone else's. It didn't have to be perfect, it just had to be mine. The smell of cinnamon and baked apples soon filled the cabin, wrapping around me like a memory turned warm. I sat by the fire as it baked, the flicker of flames dancing against the frost-covered windows. Outside, the snow fell heavier, muffling the world beyond the forest. Inside, the only sounds were the pop of the fire and the steady rhythm of my own breathing. When the pie was done, I pulled it from the oven and set it on the table to cool. Steam curled upward, carrying the scent of sweetness and spice. I cut a small slice, tasted it, and smiled. It wasn't perfect, the crust was uneven, the apples slightly overcooked, but it was the best thing I'd made in years. I carried my plate to the window, sat down in the rocking chair, and watched the snow drift down through the trees. The lantern light glowed softly beside me, reflecting against the glass. Somewhere deep inside, a quiet truth settled in. I wasn't lost. I wasn't unwanted. I had simply been walking home in the wrong direction. Outside, the forest slept under a white blanket of peace. Inside, I felt the same. I looked around the cabin, this small, wooden heartbeat in the middle of nowhere, and whispered to the empty room, "I'm home, Grandpa." And for the first time in my life, I believed it. Morning came soft and pale, a thin ribbon of light lifting itself over the line of pines and slipping through the cabin's frosted windows. The fire in the hearth had gone down to embers, a slow-breathing glow that warmed the room in a steady hush. I layered on a sweater, tucked Grandpa's letter into my jacket pocket out of habit, and stepped onto the porch. The world smelled like snow and sap and clean air. Somewhere a jay called out, and the sound seemed to bounce off the quiet. I brushed a thin drift from the car, scraped the windshield, and eased the Subaru back onto the road toward town. Bend always felt like a postcard, brick storefronts, hand-painted signs, the kind of grocery where the clerks learn your name if you show up twice. The market lot was busy with people wrapped in scarves, chattering around pyramids of pumpkins and stacks of cranberries. I grabbed a cart and moved slowly, letting the shape of the day form as I went. A small turkey that would fit inside the cabin's old wood burning oven, 2 butternut squashes, a bag of russet potatoes, onions, garlic, bundles of rosemary and thyme, a sack of flour, real butter, heavy cream, and a tub of coarse salt for a proper brine. I added fresh apples, brown sugar, cinnamon sticks, vanilla, and a stout jar of maple syrup for the glaze just because Grandpa would have smiled at the indulgence. On a whim, I detoured through the seasonal aisle and chose string lights powered by batteries, a fistful of tea candles, and a simple garland of paper leaves. I found a box of construction paper, crayons, craft glue, and safety scissors in the stationery section. The cashier glanced at the pile and grinned. Big Thanksgiving? She asked. Bigger than usual, I said, and was surprised at how true that sounded. Back in the car, with the heater humming and the smell of cold groceries mixing with pine resin that still clung to my sleeves, I pulled out my phone and dialed the number from the flyer. Mrs. Evans answered on the second ring, her voice warm and brisk like a favorite teacher's. I could hear faint chatter behind her and the thud-thud of small feet running somewhere across a wooden floor. Maple Grove Orphanage, she said. This is Mrs. Evans. I told her my name again, told her I'd reached the cabin and that the kitchen was small but eager, that I was planning a feast no one would leave hungry from. If you're comfortable, I added, feeling the words gather courage as they left me. I'd love to host the kids here in the morning. We'll do crafts, cook, eat early, run around in the snow if they want. I have land and a fire and more quiet than I know what to do with. There was a pause, and then a soft exhale like gratitude taking shape. Hannah, she said, you have no idea what that would mean. Holidays are the hardest. People remember what they don't have. If you're truly sure we can bring them up in the van at 10. I'm sure, I said. I'll drop a pin with directions. Bring as many mittens as you can find. I drove back along the ridge while the sky brightened from pewter to pearl. As soon as I reached the cabin, I made a space on the porch for Boots, a doormat brushed clean, 2 old milk crates flipped upside down to serve as benches, and set a little basket by the door with hand warmers I'd grabbed at the register. Inside, I lit the lanterns and coaxed the fire back to life, stacking split logs the way Grandpa taught me, crossed with gaps for the flames to breathe. The room warmed and the air took on the faint sweetness of wood smoke. I lugged a galvanized tub to the back stoop and mixed the brine water warmed over the stove, fistfuls of salt dissolved until it turned opaline, then rosemary sprigs, crushed peppercorn, smashed garlic, and orange peels cut into wide spirals that misted citrus into the air. I lowered the turkey in. It hissed softly, like relief. While that soaked, I scrubbed potatoes, cubed squash, set the apples in a bowl near the hearth like red lanterns waiting for evening. The cabin felt fuller with every small task, fuller in a way I couldn't explain, like I was laying out not just food but a welcome that had been missing from my life for a very long time. The rest of the morning unfurled as a quiet montage of making. I strung battery lights along the mantel where Grandpa used to hang his fishing lures, the tiny bulbs winking against the stone like a constellation I could invent. I taped the paper leaf garland over the window, where snow collected in soft scallops along the sill. I cleared the big wooden table of old field guides and set out stacks of construction paper, crayons poured into a mixing bowl, glue sticks lined up like soldiers. On the counter, I whisked eggs and cream for the pumpkin pie filling, the spices rising clove, ginger, nutmeg, until the cabin smelled like a memory I was finally allowed to keep. I rolled out pie dough with a wine bottle, pressed the crust into a tin, and cut small leaf shapes from the scraps to lay over the top like scattered secrets. As the pies baked, the window glass fogged, then cleared, then fogged again, the rhythm of warm air and winter breath making a heartbeat on the pane. By mid-afternoon, I had music playing from a small battery speaker, the volume low enough to feel like the songs were humming from the walls themselves, old folk tunes, a little Ella, a holiday standard that crept in shyly and stayed. I dragged a rug closer to the fire and set out a thrifted tin full of mismatched mugs I'd found in the cupboard, then filled a pot with cider and cinnamon sticks so the steam would curl sweetly across the room when the door opened to cold faces. I tasted the cranberries I'd cooked down with a splash of orange and maple. They were tart and bright and unapologetic. I decided to leave them that way. The turkey went into the oven as the afternoon slid toward evening. The old iron door squealed a little, then settled shut, and the cabin turned warm enough that I opened the window a crack to let the sharp air in like punctuation. I peeled carrots, listening to the snap as they broke under the knife, and lined them on a tray with spoonfuls of butter that would melt into shining coins. I mashed potatoes with more cream than necessary and didn't apologize for it even in my head. I set a shallow bowl of green beans near the stove to blanch later, tossed with toasted almonds I crushed in a napkin with the bottom of a jar. Everything about the work was ordinary and holy at once. For years, holidays had been a test I could never pass. Today, they were simply a sequence of small kindnesses, each one answering the next. As the light dimmed, I stepped onto the porch to shake out a towel and saw that the sky had opened in that deep blue way it does just before night, a blue that makes every warm window look like a lighthouse. Without thinking, I pictured my parents' house in Boise, the long dining table, the good plates, the performance of family that always began and ended with someone else's convenience. In that imagined frame, the air felt colder, the laughter thinner. I didn't will it so. I simply noticed the contrast, the way you notice when a room's draft is coming from under a door. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with warmth and cinnamon, and the sound of the music made the wood feel alive. I went back to the table and tested the craft setup the way a kid would. Traced my hand on the paper, spread my fingers like a turkey fan, drew wobbly feathers in crayon, and wrote my name in block letters at the bottom. When I finished, I laughed quietly at the silly little bird with its lopsided eye and stuck the drawing to the wall with a strip of tape. It looked ridiculous and perfect. I set a small bowl in the center of the table and dropped in a handful of smooth stones I'd found near the lake, each one with a word scrawled in marker: warmth, food, quiet, courage, enough. When I stepped back, the table looked ready not just for eating, but for belonging. The timer chimed with a bright ping, and I pulled the pies, their crusts puffed and glossy, the edges browned just enough to crackle when a knife would later kiss them. I set them to cool and basted the turkey, the maple glaze turning the skin to a lacquered bronze that caught the light like polished wood. The room deepened into evening. 2 lanterns, the string lights, the fire, 4 sources of glow that met and folded over each other in soft layers. I lit the tea candles down the center of the table, then stood back and watched the flames dance in small ellipses like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence I'd been writing for years. When the last practical task was done, there was nothing left but the quiet and the anticipation in it. I leaned against the counter with a mug of cider warming my hands and listened to the snow whisper against the window. In the corner, the little speaker crooned a song about home that didn't sound like any house I grew up in and yet described this one perfectly. I thought of the kids I'd soon meet, faces I couldn't picture yet, names I would learn one by one, appetites I would try to read the way you read the weather. I pictured them tromping up the porch steps, breath fogging, cheeks red, eyes bright at the sight of lights strung like stars in the middle of the woods. A memory came to me then of being 14 with the apple pie in my hands and the room tilting under a single sentence. I set the mug down and put a hand on the back of the chair by the fire, feeling its worn smoothness under my palm. "Not this time," I said softly into the room that held me. "Not anymore." The words didn't sound defiant, they sounded like a door clicking shut on a draft. I walked around the table counting plates and forks, adding 2 more just in case, then folded the napkins on a diagonal that felt unfussy and kind. The turkey rested under a foil tent that glowed faintly with trapped heat. The pies sighed as they cooled. Outside, the woods wrapped themselves tighter around the clearing. Inside, I could feel the shape of the morning rising, a gentle tide lifting in the chest. I looked at the table laden with food, at the halo of firelight resting on the backs of the chairs, at the paper turkey on the wall with its silly smile and uneven feathers, and I felt the simplest, clearest certainty bloom. This, I thought, my hand on the warm wood, my breath steady, my heart finally quiet. This is what Thanksgiving is supposed to be. They arrived just before 10, a cascade of boots on the porch and small voices tumbling over one another like marbles. Mrs. Evans led the charge, her scarf flung around her neck like a victory banner, and behind her came a dozen kids bundled in puffed coats and mismatched hats, cheeks lit by the cold. The cabin swallowed them gladly. Warmth met them first, the honest heat from the fire, and then the scent of cinnamon and roasted herbs, the soft thrum of music, the glitter of battery lights strung along the mantel. I helped unbutton jackets, hung mittens to dry, tucked hand warmers into little palms that opened like trust. The table we'd prepared waited with its paper and crayons and glue sticks, the bowl of river stones labeled with simple words. An older boy named Marcus ran a finger over courage, mouthing the syllables as if tasting them. A girl with a pink beanie, Leah, drew her hand turkey with careful concentration, tongue peeking out between her teeth. A smaller boy, Theo, pressed his hand so hard the paper creased, then looked at me as if he'd broken something important. "Looks perfect," I told him, and the relief that crossed his face felt like sunlight. The room filled with the unforced choreography of a holiday finally doing what it promised. "Mrs. Evans stirred the cider while humming an old hymn. I lifted the foil from the turkey and the entire cabin answered with a sound that was almost a laugh. We set out bowls and trays and pies, slid carrots and squash and green beans into their places, and when I announced we'd go buffet style because the cabin only owned 4 serving spoons, the kids cheered as if I'd invented a new sport. We ate in simple, happy chaos, Marcus darting back for a second heap of potatoes, Leah cutting her pie with surgical precision, Theo discovering that cranberry sauce tasted better when it touched everything on his plate. Someone started a song off-key, exuberant, and the rest joined, and even Mrs. Evans sang with her whole face, as if singing were another kind of heat. After the plates were mostly empty and the pies were jagged with the honest geometry of appetite, a little voice piped up near the fire. "Miss Hannah, are you lonely?" It was Theo, chin shiny with gravy, eyes huge in the lantern light. The question landed without pity, only curiosity, the kind that doesn't wound because it isn't meant to. I let the room breathe a second, let the answer come up from a place that didn't apologize anymore. "No," I said, and I felt my mouth curve in a smile that wasn't for performance. "Not anymore." Mrs. Evans was watching me with the measured tenderness of someone who knows what a sentence can weigh. She raised her mug of cider as if that were all the ceremony we needed, and the kids lifted theirs in loose imitation, apple steam curling like flags. Then they scattered some to the window to trace hearts in the fog, some to the craft corner to tape paper turkeys onto the wall until the logs looked feathered, some to the hearth to sprawl on the rug, like house cats who trusted the fire. Warmth held. Laughter threaded the beams. Outside, the snow kept falling in thick, forgiving sheets. Inside, everything brightened simply because we were there to see it. Miles away, in Boise, another table took shape with a different choreography. My parents' dining room glowed with the stiff, symmetrical light of a chandelier polished for guests. The good plates were out, the silver lined like soldiers, the linen ironed so flat it seemed to resent the crease. Brittany arrived 10 minutes late with a ring that announced itself before she did. She lifted her hand every time she spoke, as if the sentence structure required a flash at the end. My father's laugh boomed because he preferred volume to nuance. My mother fussed about the price of pecans and the outrageous cost of butter this year, which was a familiar prelude to the kind of gratitude that always sounded like a complaint in a dress. I could see it clearly, though I wasn't there. The choreography of performance, the passing of dishes like proof that they were a certain kind of family, the unspoken script in which Brittany sparkled and everyone else served the sparkle. "I told him I want a spring wedding," Brittany said, and her ring caught the chandelier's light and threw it back like a dare. "We'll need to put down a deposit soon." My mother made a face that tried to be modest and failed. "We'll manage," she said. "We always do." My father picked up his carving knife and gave a small speech as if he were auditioning for the role of provider. The performance held, sturdy as stagecraft, until the moment it didn't. It was small at first, a flicker in the chandelier, a blink no one admitted to seeing. Then, like a curtain dropping, the room fell to black. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. Somewhere a clock surrendered its ticking. From the kitchen came my mother's sharp inhale, an animal sound dressed in pearls. "Who forgot to pay the power?" she snapped into the dark. The silence that followed was not the dignified quiet of a blessing, but the scrambling hush of people doing math in their heads. "It's probably a neighborhood thing," my father said, groping for authority, but the window showed a street glistening with other people's electricity. Brittany's ring, unlit, became only metal. Her voice turned flat. "Well, someone call the company." My mother, brittle as sugar glass. "Hannah usually handles these things." The words dangled and then fell. "Call Hannah," my father said, and the order sounded thinner than he meant it to. He dialed. Somewhere, my phone vibrated on a wooden counter a state away and kept right on vibrating into a room that didn't need it. In Boise, the dark thickened. In Bend, the light piled up on itself like blankets. We cleared plates at the cabin and reset for crafts. I cut twine and turned it into a clothesline across the window, the paper turkeys pegged like flags of small countries that had finally found a home. Marcus taught Theo a clapping rhythm. Leah asked if she could put a rock from the gratitude bowl into her pocket. For emergencies, and I told her yes, of course, that's what they were for. Mrs. Evans, standing by the fire, told a story about a Thanksgiving in her childhood when the turkey fell on the floor and her grandmother rinsed it, roasted it, and no one got sick, so it became a family legend about resilience and soap. We laughed the kind of laugh that loosens the ribs. I poured more cider, topped off the green beans with the last of the almonds, and noticed how the cabin seemed to grow larger to accommodate the joy. That was the thing about warmth. It didn't run out, it multiplied. Cut back to Boise, the choreography of trouble. My father found a flashlight that flickered like it was trying to remember how to be useful. My mother rifled drawers for a bill she could wave like a summons. "Didn't we set this to auto?" she asked. But she didn't need an answer, she needed a culprit. "Hannah always." She stopped herself, as if the sentence had run out of road. Brittany checked her phone for bars, for explanations, for a universe that could be refreshed with a swipe. The turkey cooled in the dim. The crystal sweated. The room, stripped of electricity, revealed the vacancy of its welcome. There was heat only as long as someone else kept feeding it. "She's being dramatic," Brittany said into the dark. "She'll call back." My father tried again. The ringtone traveled the country at the speed of a consequence. No one picked up. The generator they never serviced because emergencies were for other people remained exactly what they'd made it, a rumor in the garage. At the cabin, a second round of eating began the way second rounds do with scavenger joy. We improvised sandwiches out of soft rolls, shaved turkey, and a swipe of tart cranberries. I cut the pies into small squares so everyone could have just one more, without surrendering dignity. The kids asked for a song I didn't know. I learned the chorus in 3 tries and pretended I'd always known it. When the fire popped and sent a tiny spark skipping onto the stone, Theo gasped, then giggled, then whispered, "Magic." I thought of all the years I'd shown up to rooms where my presence was a test and understood with a kind of steady awe that I was watching the same ingredients, food, people, a day in late November, make a different result because the recipe was finally honest. In Boise, someone lit a scented candle that smelled like manufactured cinnamon layered over cold turkey and disappointment. My mother opened the oven to borrow warmth. The heat fled quickly, as heat does when you ask it to be a substitute for love. "We can go to the neighbors," she suggested, but pride is a poor electrician and she knew it. My father said something about calling first thing in the morning. Brittany stared at her hand, the ring suddenly an answer to a question no one was asking. "It's fine," she said, which is the word you use when nothing is. They ate in a dimness that made the food taste like absence. The chandelier hung above them like an extinct constellation. When the afternoon at the cabin dipped toward that blue hour that makes every window glow warmer, we built a miniature parade. Each child carried their hand turkey on a stick. We marched once around the table, then twice, then out onto the porch where the snow squeaked and surrendered in the same breath. The woods received our noise and gave it back as echo. For a moment, I thought of the Boise house and felt not triumph, not vengeance but calibration. the way a compass needle finds north once you stop shaking it. Mrs. Evans tucked a scarf tighter around her neck and said, "You've given them a day they'll remember." I wanted to say they'd given me one I could survive by, but the words felt like they needed to live inside me a while longer before I spent them. As evening settled for good, I ladled the last of the cider, packed leftovers into containers with the solemn joy of future snacks, and helped zip coats, fit mittens, find hats that had roamed under chairs. At the door, Theo tugged my sleeve. "Can we come back at Christmas?" he asked, as if asking whether snow might agree to fall again if we were polite. "We'll see," I said, which in adult means maybe, but in the language of hope means I will try to make a world where yes is more possible. He nodded like that was binding. When they were gone, the cabin exhaled into a softer quiet. I stood in the doorway a moment, watching the taillights turn to rubies, then to nothing. Behind me, the room held the day gently, crumbs like confetti, mugs with maps of cooling cider, paper birds stippling the wall in a flock that hadn't existed this morning. I closed the door and the latch clicked with the clean sound of enough. 2 tables had been set today. One had gone dark and cold when the bill came due. The other had burned bright because we fed it with ordinary kindness until the light learned our names. I banked the fire, blew out the tea candles one by one, and let the last glow settle over the room like a promise. After the last car disappeared into the folds of the forest road and silence settled back over the cabin, I stood there for a long moment, letting the quiet pulse through me. The snow was still falling soft, lazy, endless. I shut the door gently and turned toward the table, now scattered with the remains of joy. Half-drunk mugs, crayons snapped in two, a smear of pumpkin pie filling on the tablecloth where Theo had leaned too close. The air still hummed with laughter, even though the voices were gone. For the first time in years, silence didn't feel like abandonment. It felt earned. I started stacking plates, humming to myself, when my phone buzzed on the counter. Once. Then again, faster. I wiped my hands on a towel and glanced at the screen. Mom. 20 missed calls. Dad. 10. Brittany. 45. I stared at the numbers, at the flood of unread messages that filled the notifications. Hannah, pick up. The power's out, it's freezing here. The food's spoiled, we can't cook anything. You were supposed to keep the bills paid, this is your fault. Then another, sharper line that sliced through all the others. You're cruel. Heartless. You've always loved punishing us. I let the screen glow in my hand for a second before pressing the button and flipping the phone face down on the table. The sound of a new vibration buzzed against the wood, muffled, insistent, like something alive trying to escape. I didn't move to answer. Instead, I turned back to the room. The fire was still steady, throwing gold against the window panes. The smell of roasted herbs lingered in the air. I saw the crayons lined up like soldiers in their bowl, the hand turkeys taped along the wall, all of them uneven and bright. A piece of glitter clung to my sleeve. I brushed it off, then smiled when it refused to go. For years, I'd been conditioned to respond to fix, to soothe, to be the reliable one who patched the holes others made. Every call, every text, every "you're the responsible daughter" had been another thread in the net that kept me small. Now, for the first time, I understood the simplest truth: silence could be louder than any answer. I sat down by the fire, tucked my legs beneath me, and watched the phone continue to vibrate across the table until it finally stopped. For a heartbeat, I thought of the house in Boise, the dark dining room, the flickering candlelight, my parents scrambling for control that no longer existed. I imagined Brittany pacing, whining about the Wi-Fi, my mother blaming everyone except herself, my father dialing again and again into a void he couldn't manage with his voice. The image should have made me angry, or triumphant, or guilty. Instead, it made me oddly calm. The flames shifted and cracked. I reached for a log and nudged it closer to the embers. Sparks leapt upward, tiny and bright. Outside, snowflakes pressed against the glass like quiet spectators. I realized that my phone, still face down, had gone completely still. A last text flashed briefly before the screen dimmed again. "Please, just this once, Hannah. We need you." I traced the words in my mind but didn't reach for the device. They had needed me my whole life, needed my patience, my forgiveness, my wallet, my silence. But I had never been allowed to need anything in return. This time, they could learn what it meant to sit in the dark and listen to themselves. A low laugh escaped me, soft, disbelieving, free. I went to the counter, poured the last of the cider into a mug, and sat cross-legged on the rug by the hearth. The firelight reflected on the cabin's old windows, and for the first time, I saw my reflection there not as the dutiful daughter but as a woman who had chosen herself. The weight in my chest that I'd carried since childhood loosened, sliding off like an old coat. Then I noticed something else. One of the children had left a small drawing on the mantel. It was a crooked picture of a cabin surrounded by trees, a big orange sun in the corner, and 3 stick figures, one tall, 2 small, holding hands. Across the top, in shaky letters, someone had written, "Thank you, Miss Hannah." I pressed my fingertips to the paper, feeling the texture of the crayon wax beneath my skin. My throat tightened, but it wasn't from sadness, it was something closer to awe. I reached for my phone again, not to check the messages but to open the camera. The room behind me glowed with the last of the afternoon light, the fire alive and the drawings fluttering gently in the draft. I lifted the phone and turned it toward myself, framing the shot so the children's art and the firelight spilled into the picture. I smiled, not the small, polite kind I'd learned to wear at family dinners, but a real one that started somewhere deep in my ribs and worked its way upward until my cheeks ached. The shutter clicked. One photograph. Proof that joy didn't need witnesses to be real. I set the phone down again, this time deliberately, and leaned back against the chair. The vibrations had stopped completely now. Outside, dusk deepened into the blue of early night, and the snow kept falling steady, patient, quiet as forgiveness. In that stillness, I whispered to myself, "For once, they can wait." And they did. The missed calls climbed past 100 before the screen went dark for good, but I didn't see the number until hours later. I had already fallen asleep by the fire, my face turned toward its warmth, the drawing still clutched gently in my hand. For the first time in my life, peace didn't come from pleasing anyone. It came from silence and the choice to keep it. Morning came late, slow and silver, light spilling into the cabin through a curtain of snow. The embers in the fireplace still glowed faintly, and the air carried the sweet aftertaste of cinnamon and wood smoke. I woke to the quiet, stretching beneath the heavy quilt, disoriented for a moment by how peaceful I felt. No alarms, no obligations, no voices demanding explanations. Just stillness. I brewed a pot of coffee, opened the curtains, and watched the forest outside shimmer under the new light. Everything looked untouched, pure, as if the night itself had pressed reset. When I finally reached for my phone, I wasn't prepared for the flood of notifications. Missed calls, texts, and, surprisingly, messages from people I didn't know. One headline stood out on my screen, shared by a local Bend newspaper. "Woman transforms inherited cabin into Thanksgiving haven for orphaned kids." Below it was a photo of me standing with the children in front of the cabin, all of us bundled in coats, smiling wide and honest. The snow glittered around us like confetti. Someone from the orphanage must have taken it and posted it online. I scrolled through the comments, thousands of them now, spreading fast. "This is what Thanksgiving is supposed to be. An angel in Oregon. We need more people like Hannah Reyes in the world." Each comment felt surreal. For so long, I'd been invisible, the quiet one in every family photo, the background note in someone else's melody. And now, strangers really saw me for the first time. But what moved me most wasn't pride. It was the small, steady warmth that came from knowing I'd turned pain into something that mattered. Mrs. Evans had left a voicemail, her voice thick with joy. "The kids can't stop talking about you," she said. "Theo told everyone you're the snow angel lady. They want to visit again at Christmas." I laughed softly, the sound foreign but welcome. Curious, I opened another tab and, almost without thinking, searched my parents' town, Boise. A few local community forums popped up. And there it was, whispers turning into threads, threads into gossip. Power outage at the Reynolds house again. Didn't their daughter handle their finances? I heard she cut them off. About time that poor girl stood up for herself. I stared at the screen, the coffee cooling in my hands. I wasn't proud of their embarrassment, not really. But there was a strange symmetry to it, all the balance of years of taking without thanks, finally meeting a boundary. For once, I didn't have to defend myself. The world seemed to do it for me. By noon, a reporter emailed asking for a quote. I politely declined. The story wasn't about me, it was about kindness that multiplies when given space to grow. Still, the picture kept circulating. It found its way onto larger news sites, then social media pages about good news of the week. Underneath, people commented things like, "Faith restored in humanity." A reminder that family isn't always blood. I read those words twice, letting them settle. Maybe that was the real story, the quiet revolution that happens when someone finally decides to stop giving love where it only gets wasted. The next day, my father's number appeared again. Just one call this time. No voicemail. No angry texts. Only silence. I imagined him standing by the dead landline, my mother pacing, Brittany sulking in the corner with her manicured hands gripping her useless phone. Their bills, electric, gas, internet, had all been linked to my old accounts. Once the auto payment stopped, the system closed them automatically. No electricity, no heat, no data. Their credit cards, too, had been secondary on accounts I'd long forgotten I'd opened to help build family credit. Those were gone now. Later that afternoon, my neighbor from Portland texted me. "Hey, your mom came by your old apartment building looking for you. Looked rough." I didn't reply. The truth was, I wasn't angry anymore. Anger was too heavy to carry into this new life. What I felt was something simpler: relief. I wasn't happy because they suffered. I was happy because I had finally stepped out of the role they built for me. For the first time, my safety, my peace, my money, my love, all of it belonged entirely to me. I took another sip of coffee and looked around the cabin. The paper turkeys still hung from the window, fluttering slightly in the draft. On the table, a few crayons rolled lazily when I brushed past them. I picked up the photo the newspaper had used, printed it out, and slid it into an old frame I found on the bookshelf. It looked right there: bright faces, a full table, a fire in the background. The day slipped by slowly. I spent the afternoon cleaning up, baking another small pie just because I could, and humming the same off-key tune the kids had taught me. The cabin felt alive again, like it had been waiting for laughter all this time. As evening came, I sat by the window with a blanket around my shoulders, watching the light fade into violet. Snow dusted the trees again, covering the tracks from yesterday's visit. My phone lay on the table, screen dark, no vibrations. It was the most peaceful silence I'd ever known. I thought about justice, not the kind you demand or scream for, but the kind that arrives quietly, through choices that protect your own heart. I didn't need to watch them unravel. The lesson was already delivered in the simplest way possible. Through absence, I had taken nothing from them but what was already mine. The fire popped softly, throwing golden shadows across the walls. Outside, the forest breathed in white stillness. Inside, I finally exhaled. I wasn't the daughter who kept the lights on anymore. I wasn't the mistake or the backup plan or the emotional punching bag. I was just Hannah, the woman who built warmth out of her own ashes. And that, I realized, was enough. It was 3 days later when I saw the car. A silver SUV crawling up the long forest road, tires slipping on the packed snow. At first, I thought it was a delivery truck or maybe Mrs. Evans returning something the kids had left behind. But when it stopped at the edge of the clearing and two familiar figures stepped out, my heart went perfectly still. My mother was the first to slam her door, the sound cracking through the quiet like thunder. She was wrapped in a fur-lined coat, the kind she only wore when she wanted to prove something. Brittany followed, her glossy boots sinking awkwardly into the snow, her face pinched from the cold or maybe from fury. I stayed by the porch, coffee mug in hand, watching them trudge toward me as the wind pushed against their words before they even formed. "Hannah," my mother shouted, her voice slicing the air. "You've humiliated us. The entire neighborhood is talking. The bank called. The utilities, do you have any idea what you've done?" Brittany's voice joined hers, sharp and rehearsed. "You could have just sent money like before. Was that so hard? You didn't have to go nuclear." I didn't move. The snow muffled everything but their voices, the forest echoing them back in faint, hollow tones. I took a sip of coffee before answering, letting the steam rise between us like a soft curtain. "I didn't do anything," I said evenly. "You told me not to come to Thanksgiving, so I didn't." That stopped them for half a heartbeat, just long enough for the silence to turn heavy. Then my mother's expression twisted, the way it always did when she realized her usual scripts wouldn't work. "Don't you dare play innocent," she hissed. "You've always been ungrateful. We raised you. We gave you everything." I set my mug down on the railing, watching the snowflakes melt against the ceramic. "Everything?" I repeated softly. "Or everything that made you look good?" Her face flushed red, a color I hadn't seen since childhood, the same anger that used to send me running to my room. But I didn't run now. I just stood there, still and quiet, letting her fury fall apart in the open air. Brittany stepped forward, rubbing her gloved hands together as if she could warm herself on blame alone. "You could fix this, you know," she said, her tone brittle. "Just send a payment. Dad said you've always been good with computers. You can turn it all back on in 2 minutes." I shook my head slowly. "I could," I admitted. "But I won't." Brittany blinked, confusion spreading like frost. "Why not?" "Because," I said, my voice steady, "I'm not your family's wallet anymore." IW. My mother laughed, a short, cruel sound that didn't match the words that came after. "Oh, please. This holier-than-thou act doesn't suit you. You think you're better than us now because you made the news? Because you fed a few orphans?" I met her eyes. "No," I said quietly. "Not better. Just free." Something in her face faltered, rage, disbelief, something that looked almost like fear. She looked at me the way people look at something they no longer understand. "You'll regret this," she said, but it came out thin, more desperate than dangerous. "When the world forgets about your little charity stunt, you'll come crawling back. You always do." I almost smiled at that. "You're right," I said. "I used to, but not anymore." The wind picked up, carrying bits of snow across the porch. Brittany wrapped her arms tighter around herself. "You're really not going to help?" she asked, her voice small now, almost childlike. "I already did," I said gently. "For years, you just never saw it." My mother stared at me for a long moment, her breath fogging the air between us. Then she turned abruptly, muttering something about how I'd lost my mind, and stomped back toward the car. Brittany hesitated a few seconds longer, her gaze flicking to the cabin behind me, the glow of the fire through the window, the drawings still taped to the walls. Her lips parted as if to speak, but whatever she was about to say withered in the cold. She followed my mother without another word. The engine coughed to life. The SUV backed down the snowy road, its tires whining against the ice. I stood there until the red taillights disappeared between the trees. For a long while, I didn't move. The snow kept falling, quiet, slow, deliberate. The kind that erases footprints almost as soon as they're made. When I finally went back inside, the cabin welcomed me with warmth. The fire crackled low, the air sweet with pine and baked apples. I picked up my mug again. The coffee had gone cold, but I didn't mind. I carried it to the window and watched the snow drift past, feeling something inside me settle. All my life, I'd been taught that love meant sacrifice, that to be good was to give until there was nothing left. But, standing there now, watching the storm erase their tracks, I understood something deeper. Love without respect is just a leash, and I had finally slipped mine. Outside, the wind howled once, then softened. Inside, the clock ticked steady and slow. I walked to the door, pulled it open just enough to feel the cold brush against my skin, and whispered not to them, but to the space they'd left behind, goodbye. Then I closed the door, turned the latch, and leaned against it for a long, still moment. The sound of the storm faded to a hush. The warmth from the fire wrapped around me, steady and forgiving. Snow kept falling outside, but in my chest, there was nothing but calm. For the first time in my life, peace didn't feel like silence, it felt like choice. A year later, the cabin didn't look lonely anymore. By the time Thanksgiving returned, the pine trees were wrapped in strings of lights, the porch lined with lanterns that flickered like stars caught on earth. The snow came early that year, thick, bright, unapologetic, and the smoke from the chimney rose into the white air like a quiet signal that warmth lived here. Inside, every room was alive. The children from Maple Grove had come again, some new, some familiar, taller now but still with that same wonder in their faces. They filled the cabin with color and noise, laughter bouncing off the wooden walls, paper decorations taped onto windows, boots piled by the door in a glorious mess. Mrs. Evans supervised the kitchen like a general of joy, her cheeks flushed from the oven heat. "You've outdone yourself again, Hannah," she said, stirring the cider pot. I smiled, brushing flour from my hands. "It's our tradition now," I told her. "I guess this cabin likes having company." It did. The fire crackled, the smell of roasted turkey and sweet pumpkin hung in the air, and every flicker of candlelight painted the children's faces in gold. Theo, who'd once asked if I was lonely, sat cross-legged by the hearth, carefully stringing popcorn garlands with two of the younger kids. When he noticed me watching, he grinned and waved a piece of twine. "We're making decorations," he said proudly. "For next year, too." Next year. The words settled softly in my chest. I walked to the window, where the glass fogged from the heat inside meeting the chill outside, and wiped a circle clear with my sleeve. Beyond the glass, the forest shimmered under the snow, silent and forgiving. For so many years, I'd looked at cold landscapes and felt smaller because of them. Now, they made me feel infinite. When dinner was ready, we gathered around the table, the same table that once held my quiet grief, now overflowing with life. We held hands before eating, a circle of warmth and gratitude that didn't need rehearsed prayers. Mrs. Evans said a few words, the children giggled through them, and then everyone dove in. Forks clattered, cider spilled, someone dropped a piece of pie, and no one cared. It was loud, imperfect, and utterly perfect. Later, when the meal turned to laughter and songs, I slipped away for a moment, stepping out onto the porch. The snow was falling harder now, the flakes larger and slower, glowing in the light that poured from the windows. I stood there, letting it touch my hair, melt against my skin. The forest hummed quietly around me, and for a brief moment, I felt Grandpa's presence, gentle, approving, as if he'd been watching all along. When I went back inside, Mrs. Evans was cleaning up the table while the kids wrestled over who got the last roll. She waved a hand at the mail pile near the door. "Something came for you," she said. It was a plain envelope, no return address, no handwriting I recognized, just my name, Hannah. The paper was slightly bent, as if it had traveled too long in too many hands. I hesitated before opening it, my heartbeat a low drum in my chest. Inside was a single photograph, my parents' house in Boise. The same front porch, the same wreath that had hung there for decades, now faded and worn. The windows looked dark, the paint chipped. On the back of the photo, in uneven, familiar handwriting, were 4 words. "We're sorry, Mom, Dad." I stood there, the letter trembling in my hands, the noise of the cabin softening around me. There was no explanation, no plea, no address to send a reply, just that simple confession, small and incomplete but real in its own way. For a long time, I stared at it, feeling something I hadn't expected. Not vindication, not anger, but a quiet release. I crossed the room to the mantel. Grandpa's framed photo still sat there, the one of him smiling on the porch, sun on his face, eyes full of mischief and peace. I placed the photograph beside it, under his frame, and whispered, "It's all right, Grandpa, I'm home now." Behind me, laughter rose again, sharp and bright. Theo shouted that he'd won the last roll. Someone groaned in mock protest. The sound filled the cabin like music. I turned and took in the scene, the glowing lights, the smiling faces, the warmth spilling out of every corner. For a moment, it was too beautiful to breathe. I realized then that peace doesn't come from closure, it comes from choosing not to reopen old wounds. Their apology, fragile as it was, didn't change the past. But it no longer needed to. I had already written my own ending. I sat back at the table, and the children made room for me without being asked. Someone passed me a slice of pie. The fire snapped, a candle flickered, and, outside, the snow kept falling, steady as a heartbeat. Later, as the night deepened and the last lanterns dimmed, I stood by the window once more. The forest glowed faintly under the moonlight, the cabin behind me humming with soft breaths and dreams. My reflection stared back at me, older, steadier, finally whole. In a voice barely above a whisper, I said the words that had waited a year to be spoken. Last year, I was banned. This year, I'm chosen. And for the first time, I chose myself. The snow answered in silence, the kind that means everything has finally found its place. The cabin glowed against the dark, a small miracle of warmth in the heart of winter. And inside it, I was home.